We did another forward passing line with Alpha Apache Troop 37 Cav, and most accurate spot report ever. So Apache White 4 said, hey, you're going to do this forward passing lines. You're going to get in direct fire contact less than 100 meters after doing the forward passing lines. And he was right. We got into a wicked firefight as soon as we hit the 100-meter mark. And I remember Sergeant First Class Haight, who is now Outlaw 40, Sergeant Major Haight, he was like, that was the best spot report. We were ready. I mean, we got into it and we started suppressing and destroying the enemy. But yeah, as soon as we got about 100 meters from their position, we got into a wicked firefight. And that was really the start of that 60-kilometer road march.
This is the Camp Iron Mountain Podcast, a place to learn about U.S. military history as told through the stories of service members, military units, and supporting civilians. Join us as we work to preserve their memories for future generations. Welcome back, everyone, to the Camp Iron Mountain Podcast. I'm your host, Gabriel Suarez. Thanks for joining us in the second part of our short series, looking at two of the U.S. Army's longest armored drives in their modern history. In last week's episode, we went back to World War II and shared the story of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division's attack to help close the Ruhr Pocket and capture the German city of Paderborn. In this episode, we go back 18 years to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. This will primarily be a first-person story of one junior officer's experience leading his company-level combined arms team from Kuwait to Baghdad. Sharing his story is Colonel Stu James. Colonel James was commissioned as an armor officer from West Virginia University ROTC, entering active duty service in 1996. He's held numerous leadership positions in armored and mechanized formations throughout his career. Colonel James has extensive combat and deployment experience, including 3 tours to Iraq, 1 tour to Afghanistan, 1 tour to Kuwait, and 1 stability operation in Bosnia. His notable actions with 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division during the Operation Iraqi Freedom ground invasion is the focus of this episode. Currently, Colonel James is the garrison commander for the Fort Bliss military installation in El Paso, Texas.
I was a captain and I was the company commander of Alpha Company 269 Armor. Part of 3rd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division. So we literally got into Kuwait in March of 2002 as part of Operation Desert Spring, which was supposed to be a six-month operation. It was prepositioning forces along the Kuwait-Iraq border as tensions rose. We were there until about October, so just a little over 7 months. But the great benefit we had, we got to train throughout those 7 months to prepare for war. And that was the best training I've ever had in the Army. And so we had the opportunity to go from crew qualification all the way to a brigade live fire, which is unheard of and really has never been replicated again. We shot 22 MICLICs to do minefield clearing over Alpha 22, Sergeant Jimmy Matthews' tank. So we worked all of our battle drills through actions on contact, 7 steps of EA development, TLPs. We even rehearsed how we hot refueled. And so we were able, in my company, so I was a tank team, so I had 2 tank platoons, 1 mech infantry platoon. I had an engineer platoon attached to me, also had the mortar platoon attached to me, and several other different small units attached to me because I was the lead company for 3rd Brigade. So for the entire brigade combat team, I led every fight, and I was given enablers to do that. But the beauty of that 7-month train-up allowed us to really gel as a team. And when they did the stop move, that gave me the ability to train the same people over those 7 months. We returned back to Fort Benning in late October, mid-October. It might have been early October. We were there for October, November. And then January 1st, we deployed back to Kuwait and fell back in on our equipment. So essentially what we did is because Kuwait was getting rather crowded with a lot of 3rd ID coming in, they sent us home because they had no place to put us. Literally, they had no place to put us. So we parked our equipment, left all our weapons, left our A and B bags, basically took a ruck and went home for 3 months, came back, and then immediately began training again. And then in January, we moved out of our cabal. We went back to New Jersey cabal. We've been in Pennsylvania for those 7 months. Went to New Jersey cabal, and in early February, we moved out just into the middle of the desert, above the 8-9 berm, which was east of Camp Buring, basically lived off our tanks and brads for until the invasion. And so the beauty of this whole experience was we got to train everything. And like I said, we trained hot refueling even, and that's something that doesn't happen today. I can still tell you the order of march for the company as we went through the fuelers and refueled. It was myself and the battalion commander on one fueler. It was Blue 1 and Blue 2 on another. Blue 3 and Blue 4 were right behind him. And then White Platoon was behind me. And we practiced that. We did a 45-kilometer practice road march to ensure that we knew how to road march, we knew how to navigate, and then we could hot refuel in the appropriate amount of time. So it was an incredible training opportunity that I haven't seen since. So I enjoyed that. I mean, and when we crossed the berm, we were ready to go. My team was ready. They knew home was through Baghdad, and they were motivated to go. And it was great. We really gelled as a team, and we're ready to fight together and win together. And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we did and make the movement we did in the time we did.
The night of 20 to 21 March 2003, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division's mission was to attack north over 140 kilometers to secure the 3 objectives outside the town of An Nasiriyah: Objective Firebird, Objective Liberty, and Objective Clay. Task Force 269 Armor was assigned the task of securing Objective Clay, which was a bridge across the Euphrates River.
On the night of the 20th, we were told to move out, and we had been prepping, and I'll never forget because we were having a battalion barbecue, and it was with T-Rat hamburgers, so it wasn't awesome, but it was something different, right? But we all knew something was coming, and basically in the middle of dinner, we were told, hey, it's time to go. And so we were moving to our staging position just south of the berm. I knew U.S. engineers and Kuwait engineers were busy reducing the berm starting that night. And then we crossed, we started our movement on the night of the 20th. And I'll never forget it. Well, first, the outbound fire we were shooting ATACMs. And it was incredibly loud. And they were shooting, not more than a couple kilometers from us. And it sounded like inbound. And so, guys were pumped up and ready to go. And it was clear night. You could see the outbound fire going out. It was pretty impressive. And we crossed the berm, and I'll never forget it. I did play some music. I allowed my crew we played some music as we crossed the berm for just a minute. That was the only time we'd done it in the whole. We had a couple of songs we played to get ourselves motivated, but it was actually absolutely awesome. I'll never forget going across the berm when we were red tight. We'd had main gun, service ammunition loaded, all machine guns loaded, and we were tight, and weapon control status tight, ready to cross the berm. And, this is the middle of the night. It was probably 2,300 when we started movement. By the time my company got across, it was, 001, and we're moving pretty quick north. We got into contact with 2 T-72s about 3 hours later. We bounded into contact. It was our first experience. I believe they were probably Hulks, but we saw them. They were out there. They were warm, probably from the sun. But we bounded into them, destroyed them at about 3,000 meters. It was beautiful because we, to quit action the company on them. I bounded White Platoon forward. They destroyed them, and then we carried on and got back into position and moved. And we were moving through the night, and so we found ourselves outside An Nasiriyah. I think it was the morning of the 21st. And during the night, what had happened is the Brigade recon troop actually fell behind us because they realized they didn't have the armor to survive losing first contact, right? So we didn't know what was to our front. We were basically driving blind. And so the brigade commander, Dan Allen, decided that up-armored Humvees probably wouldn't survive movement to contact. So he moved them behind us, and we became the lead element. Part of that initial firefight, we also realized that our battalion scout platoon was in the wrong place too. It took us a while to clear them out of the way, clear the FDZs so we could engage those 2 tanks because they had driven by them, but they didn't see them because they didn't have the optics we had, right? They were using NVGs versus our thermals. And so they had driven by, and we spent about 10 minutes getting them to move out of the way, out of the SDZ, so we could engage those two T-72s. So it was pretty awesome. Well, as I remember it, by dawn we were on the outside of An Nasiriyah. We had outrun the other brigades, and so we had a pause. We started the attack on Firebirds that night. So we attacked along the highway to the west. So we were at the southwestern berm, and we kind of paused for a minute. I remember it was early in the evening, and there were Apaches to the left of us that were firing on targets inside the airfield. What was the name of the airfield? Talil Air Base. And the Hellfires, as they flew over us, we became very concerned because it looked like they were going to hit us. We're like, oh god, because you could see them coming. You saw the Apaches and you saw them fire, and you saw them coming towards us, and we're like, but we were right next to the berm. We were literally right there. So it was a night attack onto Objective Clay. Fairly, there was another government agency that they said that they had bought the bridge and told us that earlier, and we didn't anticipate contact. That was not the case. We did receive direct fire contact, and then subsequently indirect fire contact on the bridge once we had seized it. And so we were there for probably 12 hours. It was a night attack. We were there in the morning, and then we handed it off to 270th Armor that morning, and then we moved to a small town to the west. We also had a Special Forces A-team with us, which proved to be very beneficial because they had a Class 1 interpreter, or Class 3, I can't remember which is higher. The highest grade interpreter, Class 3, Cat 3, yeah. And that was very helpful because we stopped outside this village and subsequently got overrun by the civilians that were so happy to see us. But here we are fully, decked out for combat, and we've got a whole bunch of civilians swarming around. So we stayed there for about an hour, and then I convinced the battalion commander that we needed to move west further and get out of range of the civilians because they were walking up to us, and the scene became insecure. I was very concerned about, our soldiers were good, but, I was concerned about, an insurgent inside there, or, an Iraqi soldier posing as a civilian, dropping a grenade in one of my tanks. And we convinced the battalion commander that we needed to move. It was great having the Special Forces A-team with us. I regret not having a journal during this whole time, but I was so tired. We basically were up. So I don't remember sleeping until we were west of that village, about 10 kilometers. And then we rested for a couple of days.
269 Armor remained in the Nasiriyah area for a few more days as the rest of the 3rd Brigade combat team moved north to secure the lines of communications up to Samawa.
We were just west of Nasiriyah for less than a day, maybe a day. It wasn't long. And then we were, the way it worked for us is they would say, hey, you're going to have a couple days for refit, break down and start, refitting. And then inevitably we would get told to move with 2 hours notice. And so this was probably the longest movement from Nasiriyah to the Najaf escarpment, on Najaf escarpment. We were driving for so long, and there was so much traffic in our way that my, let's see, I had a sergeant in my headquarters. He wasn't the master gunner, but he's basically the admin guy driving Alpha 7, which was the first sergeant's Humvee, because my first sergeant was in his 113. He fell asleep at the wheel and they rolled off the road. Luckily, nobody was injured. And that's when we convinced the battalion commander we had to stop. I'm like, sir, my guys are done. We can't go any further. So we rested, and that was just south on the Najaf escarpment. Because we'd been going through traffic the whole day. And it was like, so I'll never forget, a signal battalion had herringbone on the road. And so my gunner was smart. He's like, hey, sir, let me draw captain rank on your helmet because they don't know who you are, and this will help us get through. And I was like, hey, that's a good idea. Jason Reese was his name. He was phenomenal. Because I spent most of my time jumping out of the tank telling people to get the hell out of the way unless they would like to do the fighting. Then the whole purpose of a herringbone is you're off the road to allow the traffic to move through the center, and they didn't get that. So we got up to the on a job escarpment. Again, we were told, hey, nothing's going to happen. And then the sandstorm started rolling in. And I'll never forget, because there was a Frog 7 missile that was shot at us. And we were so tired. I was sleeping on the hood of my Humvee. I just rolled over. I didn't care. It landed. It impacted less than. And this is when we were in auto masking in effect, and we thought chemical weapons. But I was done. I'd been up for probably 72 hours and just slept. I just went back to sleep. It's like, okay. My company did too. I mean, they, some people masked up, and then after a second, they're like, okay, because we were supposed to be in a refit stage. That's when we had back in the Kifl during the sandstorm.
Task Force 269 Armor was temporarily reassigned to support 3rd Infantry Division's 1st Brigade to secure positions outside the town of Najaf, and made another long movement north over 200 kilometers to reach the new objective Jenkins. At sunset on March 26, Task Force 269 Armor relieved the unit from 37 Cav, already holding the area. Almost immediately after closing in on Objective Jenkins, Colonel Sanderson, the commander of Task Force 269, was ordered to mount a limited objective attack from Jenkins south to relieve the pressure of Apache Troop 37 Cav.
So our first mission was to do a relief in place of that 88 unit that was it was on the south side of the Euphrates, west of Kifl. And they were securing basically a battle position there to prevent the Republican Guard from attacking into the eastern flank of 3rd ID. And so it was an 88 unit Bradley equipped, linebacker equipped. And so we started moving. So we got the last fuel in the task force. I'll never forget this. We drained out the 978 fueler. We got it all. And they basically, we were out of fuel at that point. And so my tanks took the last of it. We started our attack, and that's when the sandstorm hit. And it literally, I'll never forget this. It looked like the cover of a Molly Hatchet album, where the sky turned orange. It was raining mud. And my crew became very concerned, and so did I. I'm like, do you think they popped a nuclear weapon? I mean, this is something I've never, it was literally raining mud, and we couldn't see in front of us. And so we finally got to the Kifl Bridge to relieve the 88 company. And I'm in the back of a Bradley. We're doing, we're going through the relief in place, finding where his positions are. I'm telling them how many people I have, and we're trying to figure out, how we're going to relieve at night in a sandstorm. And at that moment, my gunner comes running up to the back of the Bradley. I'm in the 88 Bradley. I think I was with the XO. I wasn't even with the commander because he was somewhere else, but he was the first Bradley we saw. And he comes running up and he's like, "Sir, we've got to change a mission." I'm like, "What? What do you mean change a mission?" He's like, "Sure, you got to come back to the tank. We've been ordered to do a forward patch of the lines and attack south." And I said, so I left that Bradley. I went back. I think at that point, I was using the Medic 113 kind of as my plans track. So, when you're in a assembly area, the best place for the medics to be is out of their track and not sleeping, right? You just kick them out so they're going and checking on the soldiers because the soldiers aren't going to come to them. And so I went back in there. I could use the light inside and not violate light discipline. And so I got the call. I started looking on the map, and oh, by the way, the bridge we were going to cross the Euphrates on was broken. It literally, both two spans had dropped in the river. So the Iraqis had dropped it so we wouldn't cross it. And I was told to cross the bridge, which was broken. And it was about 60 feet down and 60 feet up on those two dropped spans. And so we crossed it. I'll never forget my beefist almost ran off the bridge, which my infantry platoon sergeant was keeping them on the bridge, literally talking about, "Sir, you're going too far right. You're going too far right. You're on the curb. You're on the curb. You're against the barrier," because the beefist VVS2 wasn't in good shape. And so it was okay during normal light, but at night in a sandstorm, it wasn't working well. And so the driver could not see. So they switched the thermals, and they were following us using thermals. So we attacked across the bridge. We got into numerous firefights as we went down, and we did a forward patch of lines with Alpha Apache Troop 37 Cav, and that's Clay Lyle's troop, because Bravo Troop had disintegrated. And so we did the forward passage of line at night in a sandstorm, and I was very concerned because I had Apache Troop's net, but I couldn't break in it because they had so much traffic on their net, and that's where net discipline comes in because they had none. everything was Apache 6. This is, or Apache 5. This is Apache 6. Tell me a sit rep, blah, blah, blah. And, for us, it's, hey, 5, 6, sit rep, where it's very deliberate. It's burst so people can break in. And I spent probably 10 minutes trying to get on their net, and I finally did because I was concerned. I thought they were going to light us up because we were coming at them from the north, right? We were moving from north to south down this road between Kifl and Kufa. And they were at this bridge just north of the Kufa soda plant, oriented north. And so, I turned our turrets backwards and, was getting them on the net, but we had contact. And I'll never forget the next day we went through to see who we engaged because we didn't stop, but it was all Republican Guard. It was I'll never forget. One of them was a Republican Guard officer driving a dump truck. And they had the red triangle for the Republican Guard on all their uniforms. So we were like, holy hell, we're engaging the Republican Guard here. Did a Fort Patchen lines with Apache troop, went down, met up with, his name, Terry Farrell who is General 3-star now, I think, Terry Farrell. He was, I linked up with him. We saw a fueler. We refueled because you never pass a fueler. And he told us, I want you to do a thunder run. First time I'd ever heard that term. I was like, hey, task and purpose. Or he's like, move south and kill. Like, okay, Roger. So I converted that into a task and purpose for my guys. We moved south to Kufa, and then there was a Iraqi army, a Republican Guard barracks, where their 88 platoon had fired on 2 tanks and disabled those 2 tanks. And that was the first fratricide. That was in 3-7 Cav. And I'll never forget because Fat Jimmy Mizell, one of my Bradley commanders, we were looking at the tank. We're like, holy they got penetrated. What'd they get penetrated by? And he broke off one of his 25 Mike links, and he said, that was friendly fire. And so then we set up a defensive position, and we were told to be prepared for three Iraqi Republican Guard battalions to attack our position. Going over that bridge, the broken bridge, looking back, I'm stunned that they told us to do that. But we also knew if that bridge broke, we were going to be the only units on that side.
In the waning days of March, the 3rd Infantry Division was conducting 3 to 5 days of refit and sustainment operations while being continuously engaged by Iraqi troops. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were brought forward to secure the extremely long lines of communications extending from Kuwait up to the leading elements. This allowed 5th Corps to build enough combat power and logistics to move on to the next phase of the operation, the destruction of the Republican Guard divisions and isolation of Baghdad. On March 31st, 5th Corps launched what was described as the 5 simultaneous attacks. The purpose of this action was to deceive the enemy as to the 3rd Infantry Division's Karbala Gap attack axis and the location of their planned route across the Euphrates River. An additional goal of these feint attacks were to force the Iraqis to adjust their defensive positions, allowing coalition artillery and air assets to attrit them as they were caught in the open. The scheme of maneuver through the Karbala Gap was for the 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division, to lead the attack with the mission of isolating the town of Karbala. 1st Brigade would follow to isolate the western portion of the city and seize key bridges on Highway 28 with a dam on the western side of the gap. Once the dam was seized, 1st Brigade would continue attacking to the northeast, engaging the remnants of the Iraqi Medina Brigade, and finally seizing Objective Peach, the division's planned crossing site over the Euphrates River. At midnight on April 1st, Task Force 269 Armor conducted a forward passage of lines through 2nd Brigade and led the attack to isolate the eastern side of Karbala. The task force met minimal contact while working through the severely restrictive wetlands to the east of Karbala, eventually establishing a blocking position on a paved road running south of Highway 9.
We started, it was a night attack again. And here's where training comes in. So if not everyone in my company, if they didn't clearly understand weapon control status, we would have killed the scout platoon from 115 Infantry. So myself and the XO were the only 2 tanks equipped with BFTs, Blue Force Tracker. And so we do the forward passage of lines. And as the lead company, I was given the weapon control status of red free, right? So we could shoot anything not positively identified as friendly because there were no friendlies to our front. And so that's when you get that weapon control status. And so as we moved north, all of a sudden I saw on my BFT an icon for the scout platoon from 115 Infantry. And it was moving at a high rate of speed on a lateral route coming from the east. And so what do Humvees look like? You know, they look like a technical, right? They got a 50 cal on top, and at night in thermals, they're not much different. And so they were probably coming in about 25 to 30 miles an hour to our right flank, coming from east to west, just as we'd gone through the forward passage lines, probably 5 to 10 kilometers north of that, because they were lost. I could see it coming, and I immediately gave my my company the command: red hold, red hold, red hold, acknowledge. And my lead tank was the one that, you know, hands off the Cadillacs, you know, the power control handles for the turret. And those guys rolled right in front of us. Had probably 2 minutes longer, they'd have been dead. We'd have killed, and my guys were well trained. They would have killed all 10 Humvees. And so that was the first near miss. And if it wasn't for BFT, we would have killed them because they weren't supposed to be there. And, you know, we eventually that night we did run into technicals because it was interesting. They weren't using white light. They were using IR light. So this was the Fedayeen forces right outside Karbala. So we were attacking up the eastern side. And I remember we got across this canal, and all of a sudden my white platoon got attacked by a technical, right? And so I'll never forget the platoon leader's like, "Hey, I see him through my PVF7s, but I can't see him when I, you know, pull off my PVF7s." It's like, because they're using IR. And so they engaged and they destroyed that. So I had 2 or 3 technicals. And they just kept secondaries were going off all night because they had established a blocking position when that happened. So as we went north, we established blocking positions to secure our western flank, right, before we got to Highway 9. And then finally we landed sometime early in the morning on Highway 9 and established a blocking position there. Later that day, as we increased our security perimeter, we found the remnants of an Iraqi Republican Guard brigade. They put all their armored vehicles, fully fueled, fully outfitted with ammo, in the woods, in the palm groves, and covered them up with dirt and palm reeds, so you couldn't see them from the air. They were amazingly hidden. We started destroying them because there were Iraqi soldiers walking all around. Not armed and not in military clothing, but they basically what they did was they dropped their uniforms and put their civilian clothes and started walking back towards Baghdad. And we knew they were military age males, but there was nothing we could do, right? And so we didn't have the interpreter at that time, and so we really were kind of in a bad space. But we knew we couldn't detain them, we couldn't shoot them. You know, that's you know, they weren't combatants at that point. But we were concerned that one of those guys, or a couple of them, would get in one of those tanks and start it up and come at us because they were all over the place. So we started destroying the equipment there. It was all within, you know, 500 meters of our position, so it wouldn't have taken them a second to do that. And it was, you know, this was the first, you know, moral challenge we came up with, which my guys passed, luckily. The ethical challenge was they sent so we established this blocking position, right? And they sent a mentally handicapped man towards us. And he started walking, and you could see that there was something wrong with the guy. And my guys were, you know, ready, you know, we're blocking position. No one gets through. And so, you know, we started shouting, and the guy wouldn't stop. And, you know, my guys are like, "Do we shoot him?" And we knew that wasn't the right answer. And so we didn't. And so we just let him walk through the line. He came and spoke and, you know, kind of made some gestures and then just let him walk through. But I was proud of my guys for that. That was, you know, something you've never trained for. It's like, okay. But they did it on purpose. They were testing us. They were testing. And then we saw them. Then they started walking around. And again, they were in civilian clothes. So, you know, we knew who they were. There wasn't anything, and I didn't have the ability to detain them. And I had no reason to detain them at that point, but we knew who they were. And they were just walking north. So that was it. That was when we were doing that security perimeter, when we were enlarging it. That's when, what tank was it? Got hit. It was Blue 3. Sergeant, who's now Sergeant Major Calvin Hall's tank, got hit on the left side by a armor-piercing RPG round, anti-tank RPG round. No one's hurt. Didn't hurt the tank a bit, and they had some smoke in the interior, and we kept fighting. We were moving up Highway 9 north to, we're doing a reconnaissance mission to see, if we could find more. And then we ran into contact, and they asked, they got hit, and they're like, "What should we do?" I'm like, "Return." I'm like, "Everybody all right? Crew all right? Any injuries?" No. I'm like, "Is tank up?" "Yeah, tank's running. Everything's fully." I'm like, "Shoot back."
Over the next few days, the 3rd Infantry Division's 1st and 2nd Brigade combat teams pushed on against strong Iraqi resistance, achieving objectives that sealed off the western side of Baghdad. The next step required sealing the northern part of the capital at an area designated by planners as Objective Titans. On April 5th, the 101st Airborne Division assumed responsibilities for the Karbala area, and 3rd Brigade Combat Team moved north to prepare for the attack on Objective Titans. 1st of the 15th Infantry and 1st of the 10th Field Artillery rejoining the unit later that afternoon following a temporary task organization change. The full 3rd Brigade Combat Team was back together again for the first time since the fighting around Nasiriyah 16 days earlier. Now they were preparing for their attack into Baghdad. The planned column of attack to Objective Titans was to be led by Task Force 269 Armor, the brigade's main effort. The task force would follow on the heels of its scouts from Delta Troop. Captain Stu James's assassin team led the task force, followed by Team Hard Rock, Charlie 1st of the 15th Infantry. The task force's combat trains followed, including the brigade commander's assault command post and task force engineers, with the pure tank Charlie 269 Armor bookending the column. 3rd Brigade's artillery joined behind Task Force 269 Armor, followed by the 1st of the 30th Infantry and 1st of the 15th Infantry task forces, who joined the rear of the massive column as it passed. At 05:0800 hours on April 6th, Task Force 269 Armor crossed the line of departure at Objective Peach to begin a 110-kilometer attack to the northwest and north. The last 60 kilometers of the attack would be conducted under heavy fire from defending Iraqi forces. Once Task Force 269 Armor reached Objective Titans, they would lead the column through many key road junction objectives 3rd Brigade had to seize. The sub-objectives within Titans were Objective Smith, Objective Custer, Objective Patton, Objective Monty, Objective Rommel, and Objective Bradley. By the end of the day on April 6th, 3rd Brigade had its forces arrayed across all of Titans. Captain James's assassin team was assigned a position occupying Objective Monty. As the extremely long day moved into night, the Iraqis launched a major counterattack at his position defending the Tigris River Bridge in Objective Monty. The attack lasted all night and into the following morning on April 7th.
I'll never forget that. So, again, we were out refitting west of Peaches, and we've been told we're going to be there a couple of days. And then at 2200, we received the mission that the attack would be tomorrow. And this is where, again, our training had come in. And I know that sounds like a platitude the Army always says, but we had developed checkpoints, right? Battlefield architecture. And so we had designed checkpoints to rapidly move the force and then also use for direct fire planning, casualty evacuation, resupply, all of those. A checkpoint can be anything, but primarily for direct fire planning. And so we got it at 2200. I issued my order at midnight, and then we did our rehearsal at 02, and then we started movement toward LD at 04. And so that night, I got about an hour of sleep because I knew we'd need it. But that was, I'll never forget the timeline on that. We started movement at 04. We went Redcon 1 and moved out. And initially, not a whole lot of contact, but then once we got into what is now the Sunni Triangle, we started getting heavy contact. A lot of light machine gun, a lot of RPG. That's before we lost Private Huxley. We were in a column formation. I tucked my engineers behind as much as possible to be protected. So they were behind my headquarters section with the Bradleys right behind them. So they were we had two tank platoons to the front, my Bradley platoon in the rear, and I put my headquarters, the mortars, and everybody in between to provide as much protection as possible. Shortly as we started heading north in the Sunni Triangle is when an RPG came out of an alley and hit the 113. It was an armor-piercing RPG and killed Private Huxley. He was an engineer. He was in the engineer engineer platoon. And those guys kept going because there was no choice. We had to keep moving. That we kept fighting, and we fought all the way to objective Monty. So as we came, we were moving from west to east along the Army Canal, heavy firefighting there. And then once we got to what is now Route Tampa, and we turned south, what was amazing to us is, Baghdad traffic was normal. So we essentially, I merged the tank team into traffic, Baghdad, whatever morning, Tuesday morning traffic. And we were going 45 miles an hour, and it was amazing because, they were obviously shocked to see a column of tanks and Bradleys moving onto Route Tampa, which was later called, I can't remember the name of it. It's always been Tampa to me now. And, we were engaging BMPs and tanks that had been positioned. We didn't know whether they were occupied or not. I would assume at this point they were not, just because when we hit objective Monty, there were tanks, BMPs, MTLBs along the route, on the objective, and soldiers eating. They were basically hitting breakfast when we rolled up and the firefight started. They jumped in their trenches, but got in their vehicles but never returned fire. And we destroyed all the vehicles on the objective. And then my infantry finished, and we got several detainees that we were questioning, tactical questioning, and came to found they didn't think we were coming for 2 weeks. And so, positional dislocation, one, they didn't expect us to come from north to south. They didn't expect us to come that fast, and that's a testament to the shock effect of an armored column and how quickly we can move. And it saved so many lives because they by the time they saw us coming in, they had no chance. And so that was critical. But then the next 72 hours is when, the counterattacks occurred and it all blends together. I did call a final protective fires at one point. I think it might have been the second night, because they just kept coming and they kept firing, and my guys were there and we were exhausted. And, that was the first time a tank got a shot off at us before we did. I had white platoon on the bridge, what is now the Matana Bridge. We didn't know what it was called at that point. So they counterattacked with a tank company. A tank came across the bridge. My Alpha 22 saw it, had impact round loaded in the breech, shot, overlined it, missed, and then dropped one half target for him and loaded Sabo and destroyed it. But the tank, when they missed, it fired back, and I was actually oriented the other way, protecting from the west, because I had two platoons on the bridge. I thought that was more than enough combat power, so I was with the infantry platoon oriented back west. So we had a 360 perimeter because we were pretty much isolated at that point. And I'll never forget that 125 going over our heads. But then 2-2 did drop one half target for him, re-engaged, and destroyed that. But what was interesting was, the palm groves were so thick, especially to the south of us, I couldn't establish much of a perimeter because I didn't want to send my infantry platoon too far from, covering fire, right? So they got about 50 meters, maybe 75 meters into the wood line, and then I halted them because I didn't want to lose them, right? And so what was going on during that night, the next several days, is the Iraqis had a lot of 88 systems in those palm groves, well hidden, but they were using those to engage, A-10s, and I had A-10s coming in for us. And the A-10s eventually killed the rest of that tank company, so that we destroyed the first tank on the bridge. Their brothers stayed in the traffic circle on the east side. I'm trying to remember what they call that route now. But anyway, it was in north side of Sadr City. And they had stopped because obviously they just saw their brother blow up. And that's when the A-10s pounced on them and destroyed them. So that was awesome. And that was essentially sealing off the last escape to the north and west of Baghdad, where, most of the Sunni leaders lived and wanted to get to. So that's why they fought so hard, because we were basically the last exit out of Baghdad. And that's why they're fighting very hard to get through, because Objective Rommel, they dropped the bridge. And so the Al-Mathana Bridge was the only bridge left across the Tigris that they thought they could get through. And I guess they didn't realize that we were up there as well. So, yeah, that was I'll never forget one of my infantry infantryman got shot through the leg as he was clearing a trench and continued to fight and refused to be evac'd. I mean, just wouldn't leave his platoon. Wouldn't leave him. The Earth Pigs was their nickname for the infantry platoon, and he wouldn't leave. He didn't hit anything vital, but penetrated his thigh, and he wouldn't leave. That's the dedication.
The fighting raged around the perimeter of Objective Titans for the next few days. Early in the morning of April 10th, 3rd Brigade made its last major attack. Again, Task Force 269 Armor led the attack down the west side of the Tigris River along Highway 1, all the way to downtown Baghdad, where they linked up with 1st Brigade. This action completed the U.S. Army's initial operations to seize and control Baghdad. For his leadership in repelling the Iraqi counterattack at Objective Monty, then Captain James was awarded the Silver Star Medal for Gallantry in Action. At the conclusion of our talk, I asked Colonel James to reflect on his experiences 18 years ago and offer any final thoughts for the audience.
It's also important that we remember, like Private Huxley and Staff Sergeant Hemingway, who I lost. Sergeant Hemingway later, when we were in Baghdad, about a week and a half later, doing another mission. But, I walked by, I have the luxury of walking around Fort Bliss here and past the memorial almost every night. But we can't lose the memory of those folks who sacrificed everything, right? Who made the ultimate sacrifice. And that's what's important about keeping these stories and making sure we don't forget, because it is a caution to the next war, right? That has to be for, the national security. We have to take it seriously, and our politicians have to understand that. And so it's important that we remember those we lost, and also how it's impacted those families over 2 decades now and forever. And I have the honor of adding, there was a soldier from, I think it was 2 BEB. The engineer battalion that was at White Sands, that was part of 1AD. They left off a memorial here. And so on Memorial Day, we'll put Tristan Wade, his name, onto the memorial, because we'll make sure we capture that. And because he was part of 3rd Corps, he was a Corps element that was attached to the division, and his name was never captured anywhere. And so, we have to make sure we remember those folks that made that ultimate sacrifice, because it still impacts families today.
If you enjoy listening to our show, please take a few moments to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player. This simple step is the best way for you to help new listeners find the show. Join us next time as we continue to share stories from America's military past.